The smell of rotting food and leaking fuel filled the alley behind the spaceport, and Kethra Valsarin pressed herself deeper into the shadows between two massive garbage containers. Her torn cloak wrapped tight around her body to hide the wings folded against her back. She was Dretheri, a species that other races in the galaxy treated with respect and sometimes fear. But respect meant nothing when you had no money, no home, and no name that anyone would recognize. 5 years ago, she had been someone important. A daughter of House Valsarin, one of the noble clans that helped rule her homeworld. But that life felt like a dream now, something that had happened to a different person entirely. Her clan had been destroyed by lies, accused of crimes they never committed by a rival house that wanted their territory and their wealth. And when the High Council had believed those lies, everything Kethra knew had been taken away. The dissolution ceremony still haunted her dreams. The moment when the elders had declared her family without honor, when they had performed the ritual cutting of her wing membranes that was supposed to mark her as less than nothing, though they had shown mercy and only cut symbolically, leaving her wings whole but her status destroyed forever. Now she lived like an animal, sleeping in cargo containers, eating scraps, working illegal jobs that paid barely enough to survive, always hiding from the enforcement drones that would send her back to a homeworld that did not want her tonight. She was looking for thermocells, the small power units that ships sometimes threw away when they were only half drained, because she could sell working thermocells to the black market dealers, who asked no questions and paid in untraceable credits. Her clawed hands dug through piles of trash and broken equipment, and she tried not to think about what her mother would say if she could see her daughter now, covered in filth and fighting with rats for survival. The explosion came without warning. A massive ball of fire erupted from the refugee housing block 3 streets away, and a shock wave knocked Kethra off her feet and sent her crashing into the garbage containers behind her. She lay stunned for a moment, her ears ringing and her vision blurred, and when she finally managed to stand, she saw flames climbing into the night sky, bright orange and angry red against the darkness of the station's artificial atmosphere all around her. Aliens were running away from the fire, their survival instincts telling them to get as far from danger as possible. And Kethra knew she should do the same thing, because getting involved in problems that were not her own was foolish and dangerous. But then she heard a child's voice, high and thin and full of terror, screaming for help somewhere inside that burning building. Kethra's wings twitched beneath her cloak, an automatic response that she could not control, and her feet started moving before her brain could tell them to stop. She was Dretheri, and her people had evolved on a volcanic world where fire was everywhere, where the ability to survive extreme heat was the difference between life and death, and her scales could handle temperatures that would kill any soft-skinned species in seconds. The entrance to the housing block was already blocked by fallen debris and flames that reached toward the ceiling like hungry hands. But Kethra did not slow down. She just lowered her head and charged to shriek through, feeling the fire wash over her scales like warm water inside the building. Everything was chaos, with smoke so thick she could barely see, and the sound of the structure groaning and cracking as it started to collapse. But she followed the screaming, letting that desperate voice guide her through hallways filled with fire and rooms where the walls were melting. She found him in a small bedroom at the end of a corridor that was already half destroyed. He was a human child, maybe 6 years old in the way humans counted time, with dark hair and wide eyes full of tears. And he was hiding under a bed that was starting to burn, clutching a stuffed animal to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Ceiling above them cracked and a beam fell, missing the child by inches. And Kethra knew they had only seconds before the whole room came down on top of them. She grabbed the boy with one arm, wrapping her cloak around him to protect his soft skin from the heat. And she ran the hallway behind them, collapsed just as she passed through it. And the main room was now a wall of flame with no visible exit. But Kethra did not stop to think. She just tucked the child against her chest and threw herself through the weakest point in the burning wall. They burst out of the building in an explosion of fire and debris, and Kethra rolled across the ground to put out the flames that had caught on her cloak. Still holding the boy tight against her body to keep him safe, emergency responders were arriving now, their vehicles screaming to a stop near the burning structure, and aliens in protective suits were running toward the flames with equipment designed to fight fires in enclosed space. Kethra set the child down on the pavement, checking quickly to make sure he was not injured, and she was relieved to see that he was only covered in soot and shaking with fear. But otherwise unhurt, she needed to leave before anyone started asking questions. Before someone recognized what she was and called the enforcement officers who would want to know why a dissolved Dorathery was in this part of the station, she turned to go, already planning her escape route through the back alleys she knew so well. But a small hand grabbed her clawed fingers and held on tight. The boy was looking up at her with those big human eyes, tears cutting clean lines through the soot on his face. And his voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "What is your name?" Kethra froze. Names had power among her people, and to give your name to someone was to create a connection, an obligation that could never be fully broken. And she had learned the hard way that connections only led to pain. But this child had almost died, and he was looking at her like she was something wonderful instead of something broken and worthless. And she found that she could not walk away without answering him. "Kethra," she said, her voice rough from the smoke she had breathed. "My name is Kethra." The boy smiled, a small and trembling smile, but real nonetheless. And then the emergency responders reached them, and Kethra used the confusion to slip away into the shadows. She did not look back. She told herself that she would forget this night, that saving one human child meant nothing in a galaxy that had already taken everything from her, that she would go back to her miserable life and pretend this had never happened. But as she walked through the dark alleys toward her sleeping place, she could still feel the warmth of that small hand holding hers, and she could still see that smile. And somewhere deep inside her chest, in the place where hope used to live, something stirred. She did not know it yet, but her life had just changed forever. The stars above the station continued their endless dance, indifferent to the small drama that had played out below them. But the universe has a way of remembering kindness, and deaths that seem small can grow into something that shakes the foundations of Empire Skethra. Valcerin had saved the child because it was the right thing to do. She had no idea what that child's father would do to repay her. 3 days passed like any other days in Kethra's miserable life, filled with hunger and hiding, and the endless search for enough credits to survive until tomorrow. She slept in her usual spot, a broken cargo container behind a warehouse that nobody used anymore. And she worked her usual jobs, hauling illegal salvage for dealers who paid her half of what they paid anyone else, because they knew she could not complain. The fire at the refugee housing block became old news within hours, replaced by stories about trade disputes and political arguments that meant nothing to someone like her. And Kethra told herself that the human boy she had saved was probably already forgetting her name. That was how the universe worked. Kindness was forgotten and cruelty was remembered, and the only thing that mattered was keeping yourself alive. For one more day, she was sorting through a pile of broken electronics behind the spaceport, looking for anything valuable enough to sell, when the enforcement officers found her. There were 3 of them, tall insectoid aliens in the black armor of station security, and they moved with the cold efficiency of creatures who had done this 1,000 times before Kethra's heart started pounding in her chest. Both of them beating so fast she felt dizzy, because she knew what this meant. They were going to arrest her and ship her back to her homeworld, where she would spend the rest of her life in a labor camp for the dissolved. She thought about running, but there was nowhere to go. The officers had already surrounded her, and their weapons were pointed at her chest. humming with the soft sound of charged energy. "Cathra Valsarin?" one of them asked, though it was not really a question, more like a statement of fact. She nodded, too afraid to speak, waiting for them to put restraints on her wrists and drag her away. But instead of arresting her, the lead officer lowered his weapon and made a gesture she did not understand. "Come with us," he said, and his voice held something that might have been respect, though Kethra could not imagine why. "Someone wants to see you." They did not put her in restraints. They did not throw her into a transport vehicle designed for criminals. Instead, they walked beside her like an honor guard and led her through parts of the station she had never seen before. The corridors became cleaner and wider as they walked. The walls changed from rusted metal to polished surfaces that reflected the light, and the aliens they passed were dressed in expensive clothes and looked at Kethra with confusion and curiosity. Finally, they reached a door made of real wood, a material so rare and expensive that Kethra had not seen it since her childhood in House Valsarin, and the officer stopped and gestured for her to enter. "You have 1 hour," the lead officer said, and then they left her standing alone in front of that impossible door Cathara wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere except standing in this wealthy corridor wearing her torn clothes and smelling like garbage. But curiosity won over fear, and she pushed the door open. The room beyond was beautiful, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture and windows that looked out over the stars. And sitting in a chair by those windows was a human woman with dark hair and tired eyes. The woman stood when Kethra entered, and her face held an expression that Kethra did not know how to read, something between gratitude and pain and a fierce, protective love that seemed too big for a small human body. "Please sit down," the woman said, gesturing to a chair across from hers. "I have been looking for you for 3 days." Kethra sat because she did not know what else to do, her claws scratching against the expensive fabric of the chair, and she waited for an explanation that made sense. "My name is Elena Chun," the woman said, "and you saved my son's life." The words hit Kethra like a physical blow, and suddenly she understood why she was here. The boy from the fire had told his mother about the dragon lady who had carried him out of the flames, and his mother had used whatever resources she had to track that dragon lady down. "I require no payment," Kethra said quickly, the words automatic after years of learning that nothing in this galaxy was free. It was instinct, nothing more. "I saw a child in danger, and I acted without thinking." Elena Chun smiled, but it was a sad smile, heavy with emotions that Kethra could not fully understand. "I know," the woman said. "That is exactly what makes it matter. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose, but you ran into a burning building for a child you had never met." She leaned forward, and her eyes were bright with tears she was fighting not to shed. "My husband is away," she continued. "He has been fighting in a military action 3-star systems from here. But when he heard what happened, he dropped everything and started traveling home." Kethra felt confusion rising in her chest, because why would this woman's husband care about meeting the person who saved his son? Most beings would simply be grateful and move on with their lives. "Who is your husband?" she asked, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. Elena Chun's expression changed, becoming something harder and prouder, like a mask settling over her gentle features. "His name is Admiral David Chun," she said. "He commands the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, the largest military force humanity has ever assembled." The words meant nothing to Kethra at first, because she knew very little about humans, except that they were a young species who had only recently joined the galactic community. But then the implications started to sink in, and she felt her wings press tight against her back in an instinctive fear response. An admiral was a military leader of enormous power, someone who controlled ships and weapons and armies, someone who could destroy space stations with a single order or reshape the politics of entire regions with a word. And this Admiral's son was the boy she had pulled from the fire. He wants to meet you." Elena continued, her voice gentle now as she watched Cathra process this information. "He wants to thank the person who saved Marcus." "I am no one," Cathra whispered. "I am dissolved. Without clan or honor, why would someone so powerful care?" "About me?" Elena reached across the space between them and took Cathra's clawed hand in her small, soft human fingers. And her grip was warm and surprisingly strong. "Because my husband remembers everything," she said. "Every kindness, every cruelty, every debt owed. Humans are strange that way. We hold on to things long after other species would let them go." She squeezed Cathra's hand. "You saved my son. And that means you are not no one to us. You are family, and my husband will move stars to help his family." Cathra did not know what to say, did not know how to respond to this strange declaration from a species she barely understood. So she simply sat in silence while Elena Chun smiled at her with warmth that felt like sunlight after years of darkness outside the window. A star moved, no, not a star, something larger and closer, something descending through the darkness toward the station with the slow, unstoppable certainty of a mountain falling from the sky. "He is here," Elena said, and her voice held a mixture of love and warning that made Cathra's scales prickle with sudden awareness. The Dragon Lady looked out at the approaching ship and felt for the first time in 5 years something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt hope, and she felt fear because whatever was coming next would change everything. And Cathra Valsarin had learned long ago that change was rarely kind to people like her, but as she watched that massive ship descend toward the station, she could not help but wonder if maybe, just this once, the universe had something different in store. The ship that descended toward the station was the largest thing Cathra had ever seen. A mountain of metal and weapons that blocked out the stars as it approached. And she stood at the window beside Elena Chun and watched it come with a mixture of awe and terror. "That is the unconquered sun," Elena said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "My husband's flagship." Cathra's ancestral memories stirred deep in her mind. The genetic knowledge that all Drethari carried from thousands of generations of survival. And those memories were screaming at her that this ship was dangerous, that it carried enough firepower to destroy worlds. "Humans built this?" she asked, and her voice came out as barely a whisper. Elena nodded, and there was something in her eyes that looked almost like amusement at Cathra's reaction. "We have been traveling between stars for only 200 years, she said. "Other species think we are young and weak. They see us as traders and settlers and workers. Nothing special." She paused and watched her husband's ship settle into position beside the station. "They are wrong." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that Cathra could barely follow, with officials and diplomats rushing around the station, trying to prepare for the arrival of one of humanity's most important military leaders. Cathra learned things during those hours, pieces of information that other aliens shared with her as they waited, apparently assuming that anyone meeting with the Admiral's wife must be someone important. She learned that Admiral David Chun had won 47 first contact negotiations, more than any other human in history, and that he had done it through a combination of military strength and what other species called irrational compassion. She learned that he had ended the expansion of the Kreth hegemony, a brutal empire that had been conquering weaker species for centuries, not through war, but through a series of brilliant diplomatic moves that had turned the hegemony's own allies against them. She learned that he had been fighting a border skirmish 3 systems away when he heard about the fire that almost killed his son, and that he had crossed those 3 systems in 2 days, a journey that should have taken 2 weeks, pushing his ship and his crew to their absolute limits to get home. This was the man who wanted to meet her, a homeless Drethari who ate garbage and slept in broken containers. And Cathra could not understand why finally the moment came. And Cathara found herself standing in a formal meeting room with polished floors and walls covered in artwork, wearing new clothes that Elena had provided because her old ones had been too damaged and dirty to where the door opened, and Admiral David Chun walked in. He was shorter than Cathara had expected. A human male of perhaps 50 cycles, with gray hair in his temples and scars on his hands that spoke of battles fought long ago. But there was something about him that made the room feel smaller, a presence that demanded attention. His eyes found Cathara immediately, and she felt those eyes measuring her, evaluating her, seeing past the surface to something underneath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Admiral Chun did something that Cathara did not expect, something that made her heart stop beating for a full second. He bowed, not a small nod of acknowledgement, but a deep formal bow, the kind of bow that Drathari nobles gave to those they considered equals or superiors. And Cathara stood frozen in shock as one of the most powerful humans in the galaxy showed her this respect. "Among my people," he said as he straightened, and his voice was calm and controlled, but filled with something that sounded like gratitude. "There is no debt greater than the life of a child. You gave me back my son, and for that I will be grateful until the day I die." Cathara's wings trembled beneath her new clothes, an automatic shame response that she could not control. Because how could this powerful man be thanking her when she was nothing? When she had nothing, "I require no payment," she said, repeating the words she had spoken to Elena. "I acted without thinking, without calculation. I did not save your son because I wanted something in return." Admiral Chun smiled, and it was the same smile his wife had given her. Warm and knowing and somehow sad. "I know," he said. "That is exactly why I am asking." He gestured for her to sit, and she did, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her up. And he sat across from her and looked at her with those eyes that seemed to see everything. "Tell me your story," he said. "Tell me who you are and how you came to be living in the shadows of this station. Because a woman who runs into burning buildings to save children she has never met is not the kind of woman who ends up homeless without a reason." Cathara did not want to tell him, did not want to share the shame and pain of what had happened to her family. But something in his voice made her trust him, made her believe that he actually wanted to know, and that he would not judge her for her fall from grace. So she told him everything. She told him about House Valsarin and the false accusations that had destroyed her family, about the rival clan that had wanted their territory and had been willing to lie and cheat and bribe to get it. She told him about the dissolution ceremony, about standing before the High Council while they declared her family without honor, about the symbolic cutting that had left her wings intact, but her spirit shattered. She told him about 5 years of falling through the cracks of galactic society, about sleeping in garbage and fighting for scraps and hiding from enforcement officers who would have shipped her back to a homeworld that considered her less than nothing. Admiral Chun listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing of what he was thinking. And when she finished speaking, he was quiet for a long time. "The Drathari High Council," he finally said, and his voice had changed, becoming harder and colder, "has been requesting a formal alliance with the Terran Collective for 6 years. We have declined every time." Cathara felt confusion, because she did not understand what this had to do with her story. "Why?" she asked. "Because of your caste system," Chun said. "Because of how your people treat those they consider beneath them. Because the idea of dissolution, of throwing away living beings like they are garbage, conflicts with everything humanity believes in." He leaned forward, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who commanded warships, hard and determined and absolutely certain. "My son is alive because a woman your society threw away still had more honor than all the noble clans who condemned her. That tells me everything I need to know about where the true worth lies." Cathara could not speak, could barely breathe, because she was starting to understand what this man was saying. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Admiral Chun stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars that humans had claimed in such a short time. The Terran Collective is about to make a counter-proposal to the Drethry High Council, he said. We will offer them everything they want. Full alliance with military and economic and technological cooperation. He turned back to face her. But there will be conditions. And one of those conditions will be a complete review of every dissolution conducted in the last 20 cycles. Including yours. Kethra's wings burst free of her clothing, spreading wide in an involuntary display of shock. And she could not stop the tears that started falling from her eyes. You would damage relations with my entire species, she said, her voice breaking. For me? For justice, Admiral Chun said, and he walked back to her and put his hand on her shoulder. A gesture of comfort that felt strange coming from someone she had just met. Humans remember, Cathara Valsoren. We remember every kindness and every cruelty. And we pay back our debts. He smiled again. You saved my son. Now let me save you. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Cathara had experienced in her entire life, filled with meetings and negotiations and the slow grinding machinery of galactic politics. And through it all, she watched in amazement as Admiral Chun did exactly what he had promised. He did not just ask the Drethry High Council to review her case. He demanded it, and he backed up that demand with the full weight of the Terran Collective's power. The council members were furious at first, sending message after message complaining about human interference in sovereign Drethry affairs, insisting that the dissolution system was a sacred tradition that outsiders had no right to question. Admiral Chun's response was simple and devastating. Then you will have no alliance with humanity, he said during one communication that Kethra was allowed to observe. We will trade with you. We will maintain diplomatic relations. But we will never call you friends. We will never share our technology. We will never fight beside you in battle. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. The galaxy is changing. Honored council members, new threats are emerging every year. And the species that stand alone will not survive. You need us more than we need you. And the price of our friendship is justice. The council argued and threatened and tried everything they could think of to change his mind. But Admiral Chun did not move, did not bend, did not offer any compromise. Review the dissolutions, he said, over and over. Prove that they were fair and just. And if they were not, then fix the wrong that was done. Meanwhile, Kethra lived in quarters that Elena had arranged for her on the station. Real rooms with a real bed and food that came from kitchens instead of garbage piles. And she spent her days trying to understand how her life had changed so completely. Young Marcus visited her often, the human boy she had saved from the fire. And he seemed to have decided that Kethra was the most amazing person in the galaxy. Tell me about your wings, he would say, sitting cross-legged on her floor while she worked on learning to use the computer systems that now filled her life. Can you really fly? Have you ever breathed fire? Are you a real dragon? Kethra found herself laughing at his questions, a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. And she would tell him stories about her people while he listened with wide eyes full of wonder. I cannot breathe fire, she told him one day. But my scales can survive temperatures that would melt metal. And my people evolved on a world where volcanoes covered half the surface. Cool, Marcus said, which was apparently a human word that meant impressive. You are like a superhero. The concept made no sense to Kethra, but she smiled anyway. Because this strange little human and his family had given her something. She thought she had lost forever. They had given her hope. 3 months after Admiral Chun arrived at the station, the Drethry High Council finally broke. They agreed to review all dissolutions from the past 20 cycles. And they agreed to allow human investigators to participate in that review, ensuring that the process would be fair and thorough. Those investigators found shocked even Kethra House Valsarin had been completely innocent. The evidence against them had been manufactured by their rivals using bribed witnesses and forged documents. And the council members who had approved the dissolution had known this all along. They had accepted bribes to look the other way. They had condemned an entire family to shame and suffering for money. And now that truth was exposed for the entire galaxy to see, but the corruption went deeper than just Kethra's case. Investigators found hundreds of similar situations. Families dissolved on false charges. Individuals stripped of their rights because they had made enemies of powerful clans. An entire system designed to allow the strong to destroy the weak whenever they wanted. The scandal rocked Drathiri society to its core. Some council members tried to defend the old system, claiming that tradition was more important than individual cases of injustice. But their arguments sounded hollow now that everyone could see the truth. Other council members turned against their colleagues, trying to save themselves by exposing even more corruption. And soon the High Council was tearing itself apart as members accused each other of crimes that had been hidden for decades. Through it all, Admiral Chun remained calm and steady, guiding the process without ever seeming to control it, always focusing on justice rather than punishment. "We do not want to destroy your society," he told the council during one of their many communications. "We want to make it better. We want to help you build something that treats all your people with dignity. Because that is what friends do." The word friends hit different now, carrying a weight that it had not carried before. The Drathiri were beginning to understand that humans meant exactly what they said. That their friendship came with expectations, but also with genuine care. That they were offering not domination, but partnership. Ithar watched all of this from her new quarters, studying the reports and attending the meetings and slowly learning how politics worked at this level. And she began to see something that surprised her. The humans were not doing this just for her. They were doing this because they genuinely believed it was right. Because their entire species had decided long ago that some things were worth fighting for, even when there was no personal benefit. Because they remembered not just debts but principles. Alina explained it to her one evening while they shared a meal in the Chun family quarters. When humans first reached the stars, she said, "We were weak and vulnerable. Dozens of species could have conquered us or enslaved us. But most of them chose to leave us alone or even help us." She smiled at the memory. We never forgot that. The kindness of strangers who had nothing to gain. And we decided that when we became strong enough, we would be that kindness for others. Kethra thought about those words for a long time, turning them over in her mind like precious stones. And she began to understand why humans had risen so fast in a galaxy full of older and more powerful species. It was not their ships or their weapons. Though those were impressive enough, it was their memory. They remembered every kindness and repaid it with interest. They remembered every injustice and worked to prevent it from happening again. They built relationships based on trust and mutual respect rather than fear and domination. And now they had chosen to remember Kethra Valsarin, a homeless dragon who had saved a human child because it was the right thing to do 6 months after the fire. The Drathiri High Council made an official announcement. House Valsarin was restored, their honor recognized, their property returned, and Kethra was formally welcomed back into society as a noble daughter of a noble house. But Kethra surprised everyone, including herself. "I do not want to go back to my old life," she told Admiral Chun when he delivered the news. "I want to stay here. I want to help build bridges between our peoples. I want to be part of what humanity is creating." The Admiral smiled, and in his eyes Kethra saw something that looked like pride. "I was hoping you would say that," he said, "because I have a job offer for you." 1 year had passed since the night of the fire, and Kethra Valsarin stood on the bridge of the Unconquered, Sun watching the stars stream past the viewports like rivers of light. She wore a new uniform now. Midnight blue with silver trim, the colors of the Terran diplomatic corps. And the badge on her chest identified her as a liaison officer, first class. One of only a handful of non-humans ever granted such a position. The job that Admiral Chun had offered her was unlike anything she could have imagined during those dark years of living in shadows and eating garbage. He wanted her to be a bridge between species, a symbol of what was possible when different peoples chose to work together instead of against each other. You understand both worlds, he had explained when he made the offer. You know the old Drethery traditions, but you also know what it feels like to be forgotten by the system. That perspective is valuable. That perspective is rare. Kethra had accepted without hesitation. And the past year had been the most challenging and rewarding of her entire life. She had traveled to dozens of worlds as part of Admiral Chen's diplomatic team, helping to negotiate treaties and trade agreements and cultural exchanges, using her unique position to build understanding between humanity and the older species of the galaxy. Not everyone had welcomed her at first. Some Drethery nobles considered her traitor for working with the humans who had humiliated their council, and some humans were suspicious of having an alien in such an important position. But Kethra had learned to be patient, to let her actions speak louder than the doubts of others. Now those same nobles who had looked down on her were seeking her advice, realizing that the humans valued her opinion and that insulting her meant insulting their powerful new allies, and the humans who had been suspicious had become her friends, inviting her to their family dinners and their celebrations. Treating her as one of them rather than as an outsider. Elena Chun had become like a sister to her, and young Marcus had appointed himself her official teacher of human customs, explaining everything from holiday traditions to children's games with the serious dedication of a scholar. Bridge of the Unconquered Sun hummed with activity as the ship traveled through faster than light space. Officers monitoring systems and communications flowing in from across the sector, but Kethra stood apart from it all, looking out at the stars and thinking about how far she had come. Admiral Chun approached her position by the viewport, datapad in hand, his eyes tired from the long hours he always worked. "The council is furious again," he said, but there was amusement in his voice rather than concern. "They are calling our latest proposal interference in sovereign affairs." Kethra's wings shifted beneath her uniform, a gesture that the human crew had learned to recognize as a shrug. "They call everything interference," she replied. "Last week, they called your request for cultural exchange programs an attack on traditional values, and yet they signed the agreement anyway, because they know they need you." Kethra said, "The galaxy is changing. The old powers are weakening and humanity is rising. They can either be your partners or be left behind." Chun nodded, looking out at the stars with an expression that Kethra had come to recognize as deep thought. "We do not want to dominate anyone," he said quietly. "That is not who we are. We just want to build something better. A galaxy where every species has a chance to thrive." "I know," Kethra said. "That is why I follow you." Below them, in the ship's observation lounge, a remarkable scene was unfolding. Marcus Chun was teaching a group of Drethery children how to play a card game that involved making up lies about what cards you held and trying to convince the other players that those lies were true. And the children were shrieking with laughter as they tried to master this strange human concept of friendly deception. Their parents watched from nearby couches, some looking scandalized by the idea of teaching children to lie, others looking fascinated by this glimpse into human culture. This was the future that Kethra wanted to build. A galaxy where children of different species could play together without fear, where cultural exchange happened naturally instead of through formal diplomatic channels, where the divisions of the past could be healed by the connections of the present. She had learned so much about humans in the past year, and the more she learned, the more she understood why they had risen so quickly. Despite being such a young species, they were not the strongest or the fastest or the oldest. Their technology was impressive, but not unique. Their military power was substantial, but not overwhelming. What made them special was something harder to define, something that lived in the way they treated each other and the way they treated everyone else. They remembered. They remembered kindness and repaid it with more kindness. They remembered injustice and fought to prevent it. They remembered their friends and never abandoned them. They remembered their principles and refused to compromise them even when it would have been easier to look the other way on her homeworld. Cathra would have been forgotten within a generation. Just another dissolved who had fallen through the cracks of a system that did not care about individuals, but the humans had refused to forget her. They had taken a broken dragon lady who had nothing to offer and had given her a purpose, a family, a future worth living for, and in return, Cathra had given them something just as valuable. A perspective they could not get anywhere else. A voice that could speak to species who still viewed humanity with suspicion or fear. She was proof that humans meant what they said, that their offers of friendship were genuine, that they would fight for justice even when it was difficult or inconvenient. The Drethri had an old saying, passed down from the volcanic ages when their ancestors had learned to survive in a world of fire and ash. Fire reveals the true metal. The saying went, meaning that extreme circumstances showed what someone was really made of. The fire that had almost killed Marcus Chun had revealed what Cathra Valsarin was made of. Courage and compassion, and an unwillingness to let an innocent child die just because saving him was dangerous. But that same fire had also revealed what humanity was made of. Gratitude that refused to be forgotten. Determination that refused to accept injustice. And a belief that every life had value regardless of status or species or circumstances. Galaxy was slowly learning what humans were capable of. And some of what they learned made the older species nervous. But Cathra thought that was a good thing. The galaxy needed to change. The old systems of power and privilege had created too much suffering for too long. And if it took human stubbornness to break those systems open, then so be it. She looked out at the stars streaming past, thinking about the homeless creature she had been just 1 year ago. And she felt a surge of something that she could only describe as joy. Cathra Valsarin, once penniless, once nameless, once less than nothing in the eyes of her own people, now stood among the stars as an officer and a diplomat and a friend to one of the most powerful families in the Terran Collectivo, because she had run into a burning building to save a child. She had never met all because humans remembered. She smiled, her fangs gleaming in the starlight, and made a promise to herself she would spend the rest of her life helping to build bridges between species, showing others what she had learned about humanity, demonstrating through her own existence that kindness was never wasted and that even the smallest act of courage could change everything. The stars continued their endless dance. But they were not indifferent anymore, not to Cathra Bess somewhere out there, on worlds she had not yet visited and among species she had not yet met. There were other lost souls waiting to be found, other victims of unjust systems waiting for someone to fight for them, other fires waiting for someone brave enough to run into them, and humanity was coming for them all, not with weapons or threats or demands for submission, but with memory and friendship and an absolute refusal to accept that cruelty was just the way things had to be. Cathra turned from the viewport and walked toward the command center, ready to begin her next shift as a bridge between worlds. The Dragon Lady had risen from the ashes, and she was just getting started.